I hear about a body in a freezer. There ain't no body in a freezer. That's bullshit. This was sort of the culmination of the roads diverging, the beginning of the end for Sean Finnegan and his crimes against Jennifer Paxton. That was the interaction he had with an Oak Ridge police officer on August 5th, 2020. But how did we get here? You're going to hear the evidence today from the state's witnesses, including someone who's there, including investigators. But it all comes down to the roads of three people. Sean Finnegan was getting investigated that day, initially, as what was maybe a neighborhood complaint. But what had happened to get us to this point was this defendant kidnapped Jennifer Paxton, brought her to his house here in Oak Ridge from Knox County, looked at Rebecca Dishman and said, "You want to kidnap her?" and hit her with a baseball bat across the head. He then chained her to his bed. The two of them engaged in raping her, kept her chained for days. She had to defecate in a Fireball whiskey bucket that they brought upstairs to the bedroom for her. And at some point he said he was going to kill her. And Sean Finnegan, at that point, strangled Jennifer Paxton to death. Multiple times. It took hours, perhaps, for Jennifer to actually pass, because you'll hear that Sean Finnegan would choke her and then let her go, and choke her and let her go. You'll see the physical evidence from her throat, actually ligature marks from it cut open. After he finished, cleaned up the body, ordered a freezer and put that freezer in his house, wrapped up her body, and put Jennifer Paxton in a freezer. And he kept her there for 8 months until, again, what's this I hear about a body in a freezer? So we have Jennifer Paxton. You've heard a little bit about her. She was addicted to drugs. She lived in homeless camps, transient. Sometimes she was on Chapman Highway homeless camp. Sometimes she was at one near Merchants Drive. Those are both in Knox County. Sean Finnegan worked at the Pint House. That is a bar pub that is on Merchants Drive in Knox County. She engaged in prostitution. And it was something that she would do to trade drugs or money for sex. She ended up coming home with Sean Finnegan. Ostensibly for that. Drugs, sex, good time. But she never left that house. You'll hear from Rebecca Dishman. She's the co-defendant in this case. You just heard me read her name on conspiracy charges, working in conjunction with him. And you'll hear, she was there. She had a relationship. You'll hear her up from the stand right here tell you that she and Sean Finnegan were dating. She loved him. She was about 21 years old when they met in the fall of 2019. And by December of 2019, Jennifer Paxton was being held hostage in the same apartment where Rebecca Dishman was living with her boyfriend, Sean Finnegan. So she's 21. She moves in with Sean after meeting him on Facebook in the fall. She has what is a BDSM relationship with Sean Finnegan. If you're not familiar with that term, it is bondage, dominance, submission, sadomasochism. It is a master-servant sort of relationship. And she's into that. You'll see that she was engaged in this as his submissive, and he was the dominant. He was her master. She called him master. Mr. Finnegan is in the early 50s, 51, 52, when they met. She also calls him daddy. The power dynamic of these two individuals is very clearly master, submissive, dominant, submissive, daddy, baby girl. She's engaged in this. She participated. The state submits to you that Sean Finnegan was in control of this situation. She's there. He keeps her from having cell phone access. She doesn't have a job. She doesn't have a car she can drive. There's one there that was her aunt and uncle's. She doesn't know how to drive it. She can't leave. No job, no phone. She engages in the sexual acts with Jennifer Paxton. She is home when Jennifer Paxton's chained to the bed, and she's there when Sean Finnegan is choking her. But you'll see from the proof that Rebecca Dishman was a participant at the behest of Mr. Finnegan. You'll see that she was controlled, and eventually her dynamic with Mr. Finnegan changed from this is something I'm an active participant in to the point that she felt like she needed to get out. And she tried to get out. She went to neighbors. You'll hear from some of those. You'll hear about how she was telling them that she was getting hit, about how he was controlling of her. They saw it too. So she goes and she gets a neighbor who's tried to get her some help, and it's like, okay, we're going to get you this shelter. So in August of 2020, they make arrangements to pack up her stuff, what little she has, and get out and take her to a shelter. They're going to go up in Campbell County to get away from here in Anderson County. One other person lives in this house with Sean and Rebecca, and that's Sean Finnegan's mother. I believe the proof showed that she was aware that Rebecca was leaving and notified her. Sean comes home and realizes she is gone and confronts a neighbor. Meanwhile, Mahogany Heck, Pico, she was Mahogany Heck at the time, Pico got married, she helps Miss Dishman. And they are driving up to Anderson, they're driving up from Anderson County to Campbell County, and Miss Dishman says, I gotta tell you something. And at that point, Miss Dishman tells her about the kidnapping, about beating Miss Paxton with a bat, about having her chained to the bed rail for days, tells her about the choking and the killing, and tells her she's in the freezer. And that freezer is in the bedroom closet. It is in Sean Finnegan's closet. Mahogany says we have to call the police, and does that. And they report and they send them back here to Anderson County. So they are en route back here, and Mahogany calls her fiance, now husband, Colt Pico. and he calls the police. So we have, again, these roads converging. Mahogany and Rebecca are on their way to Anderson County, getting to Anderson County. Colt Pico calls 911. While he's calling 911, Sean Finnegan, all these roads converging now, is on his doorstep saying you should mind your own business, angry at him, cursing him, and you'll hear that 911 call from Mr. Pico and hear from him telling you about this incident where he's telling the police, here's what my wife is telling me, and this guy's on my doorstep. So the officers arrived. That's where we began here. And said, what's this I'm hearing about it? And he says, ain't nobody in the freezer. That's bullshit. So what happens next? From here, officers separate the two parties. Those patrol officers leave, and Rebecca is now arriving in Anderson County. And she's talking to people from the sheriff's office, and they realize this is something that happened in Oak Ridge. So she goes to Oak Ridge, and she gives a statement there, and they're like, there may be something to this here. This is quite a statement. So they put patrol on the house to look, make sure nobody's leaving, nobody's coming, going. They bring the crime task force out. They're monitoring the area, make sure nothing's happening, and they continue investigation. So we have these people at the scene, at the house on 318 East Fairview in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And then we have investigators who are doing interviews, working with Knox County to see if there's a missing person from Knox County, because this is the information that Ms. Dishman is supplying, all of the graphic details of what happened and where this girl's from. They get an identification of this woman, Jennifer Paxton, and they get a search warrant. And so they go into the house in the wee hours of the morning. It's August 6th, before dawn at this point. And they go in and look around the house. And they open that freezer. Frozen pizza and burritos. Well, that's weird. So they continue looking around the house, and they've monitored through the course of this. They've seen Sean Finnegan go out, smoke. He actually took a drive, went to a store, got some cigarettes. They have people watching him the whole time, goes back. So they look around. Sean Finnegan had taken Jennifer Paxton's frozen body and put it under his bed while the officers doing the investigating. Reassembled, put the shelves back in the freezer, and put in frozen foods. But investigators were able to find her. And as is normal in an investigation, called in medical examiner's office. And you'll hear testimony from the medical examiner about the injuries that occurred to Jennifer Paxton before she died. Those blows to the head, the strangling, the wounds, the bruising. You'll also hear about injuries to the body after she was deceased. Her nose had been removed. Dozens of sharp force trauma, lacerations, cuts to her body that occurred after death. You'll hear how there's freezer burn on her. She had been there for 8 months, at least since late December, early January. It is indicated from the examination that the freezer burn and stuck to the freezer, she had to be cut out, literally cut out on her arm and the side of her face to get her out of the freezer, to then put her frozen fetal position body under the bed. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the proof, the state's going to ask you to think about the proof, to Think about what you heard, what you saw from this witness stand, and apply your common sense and the laws instructed by the judge to the facts of this case. And the state submits to you that when you do that, it will be evident that Sean Finnegan committed first-degree premeditated murder, that he raped Jennifer Paxton. He used a baseball bat. He hit her. He caused bodily injury to her. Sean Finnegan kidnapped her, kept her chained to the bed. Sean Finnegan worked with Rebecca to do this. Sean Finnegan tampered with the evidence, freezing her, wiping her down with bleach before he put her in there and wrapping her up. You'll hear that when this body was found, it had dozens and dozens of post-mortem injuries occurred to the corpse of Jennifer Paxton. At the conclusion of the proof, you'll see that Sean Finnegan is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of each and every count which he is charged, and we will ask you at the conclusion of the proof to return that verdict of guilty.
Thank you.
So yesterday when we were talking about perspective, and I told you guys this was going to be difficult. And the reason is because of the events, and the situation, and what you're going to hear is most of it is related to things that happened afterwards. And so that's one thing I'm going to ask you to separate. Your job is to figure out if Mr. Finnegan is guilty of something, what he's guilty of. And so you have to be able to separate out the fantastic nature of these facts, because we're going to be talking about stuff that maybe is not in most of our lives. It's not in mine personally, generally, so it's really hard to understand things from that particular lifestyle. But this is a lifestyle that all of these folks were involved in to some degree. Restaurants, late nights, drugs, alcohol, sex, kinky sex, weird sex. It was part of what they were doing. And so I guess I'm asking you to kind of step back and think about it, even if you can't view it from the perspective of someone who does that, just realizing that they probably view the world a little bit differently than you do, and maybe they would make different decisions when faced with different issues than you would, or that I would, or anybody would that's not involved in that type of situation, okay? And so that's all I'm asking you to do with regards to perspective, because we all come in with different perspectives. And so when we have prosecutors, they look at things through a prosecutor's lens, right? And defense attorneys look at things through defense attorney's lens. It's probably not surprising to you that I see things a little bit differently than they do, or we wouldn't be here probably. Mr. Finnegan sees things a little bit differently than they do, or we wouldn't be here probably. We're going to talk a lot about Rebecca Dishman. They want you to understand this master-servant relationship, dominant, submissive relationship. And the age difference is a big deal, right? He's in his 50s and she's in her early 20s. And I think that they're trying to present her as mentally handicapped somehow, which she pled guilty to murder, y'all. But they're trying to present her as some kind of mentally handicapped person because she's the witness now. And the story comes from her. Nobody else was there. Sean and Rebecca Dishman. And Sean's mother, who he was taking care of, who was in hospice care. So, who can tell the story, right? She can. So all of the facts that you just heard, all of the stuff that happened to Jennifer Paxton is straight from Rebecca Dishman's mouth. And so all I'm really asking you to do is I'm asking you to do the same thing they're asking you to do, basically. And that's to just pay attention to the evidence. And you need to ask yourself, how does that apply to what happened to the versions of what happened, okay? Because Rebecca Dishman also gave multiple versions of what happened. Mr. Finnegan gave a statement too, and I have to assume that you're probably going to hear it, that the state's going to play it. So I mean, you'll hear what he says happened too. And from my perspective, the physical evidence and all of the evidence, the timing is more consistent with his version of events than hers. Mr. Finnegan worked full time. He worked at a restaurant. He's a very simple, straightforward kind of dude. I guess he goes to work and he works long shifts. He doesn't get home till 3 or 4 in the morning. He supported himself, his mother, and Rebecca Dishman while she lived there, and a couple other people who he supported when they needed help and asked him for money or drugs or whatever. It's the lifestyle that they lived. He was giving people places to crash. So I'd like to present this in a different way. We have this age difference, and our natural reaction, it's my natural reaction, okay, to that when we see this age difference and they're poor, that the old man must be taking advantage of the young girl for sexual favors or for whatever. If he were Leonardo DiCaprio, we would say that the 21-year-old is taking advantage of him for his money. Maybe, right? I mean, the point is the perspective, and you have to look at who's in control the whole entire time. For 9 months, that body's in that freezer. She's alone at that house most of the time. Most of the time. Not locked. I mean, I'm talking about Rebecca Dishman, the one who tells the story of what happened there. The one who told the story that the state bases their entire case upon. Her version of the events. Okay. She was the one who was there alone. With Jennifer Paxton, he was at work. He worked in the evenings. So for 9 months, and a body in the freezer, or days supposedly chained to a bed, and all of these type of things, I mean, you better make them prove that stuff, because that comes out of her mouth. All of those events. And you also need to think about who was into this, who would want these type of things, who would benefit the most from this type of thing, who would have some sort of motive to kill the prostitute that Mr. Finnegan brought home. You're going to hear that they had threesomes before. This wasn't the first time that someone had come home. You're going to see texts where she's saying, I want to have sex with a girl. It's time, I want to have sex with, it's time or whatever. I mean, this was stuff that they did, all right? So who had motive to kill? Mr. Finnegan goes to work and supports everybody and likes sex. And smokes pot. He's an old burnout. Got like a 6th grade education. Who's in control? She lets it slip to her neighbor, or she starts talking to her neighbor. Maybe she's getting ready to leave or something, I don't know. But she starts talking to a neighbor who's been hanging out with him for months. Stays over there, they're all friends, they hang out. If she's being abused all this time, that's what they want to say, she's being abused all this time. No reports, nobody, this friend's not going to try to get her out or help her in any of this kind of stuff. So finally, this one day, she lets it slip to a friend or starts talking to her about, well, he's just being abusive now and stuff. And maybe the friend's had enough of hearing it or something because she's not doing anything or she's not seeing any evidence of it, or I don't know what. We're probably going to hear from her. We can ask her, I guess. But that day, she tells her, and then what happened? It's just now she's got to go with something, doesn't she? She left the house. She's got her stuff. She's got a friend. And from the very beginning, she knew who would get blamed. It's his house. He's a 51-year-old man who's there taking care of his mother. She's a 21-year-old girl who basically gets whatever she wants to using sex. And who do you think is going to get blamed? Who do you think that she thought was going to get blamed? Who do you think he thought was going to get blamed? So I think at the end of the proof, you're going to find him guilty of some things. I mean, if they prove it, then you should, right? But there are two different things. He gave a statement to the police. She gave several statements to the police. She's going to get some more statements in here. But he also just gave another statement that she did not give. And that's when I stood up for him just a minute ago and I said, not guilty. For some reason, the state's given her a plea. She had lawyers too. right? She had lawyers too. And she had good lawyers. I don't think that they would if she was mentally incapacitated, I don't believe they would let her plead guilty to a first-degree murder. If they didn't think she was mentally culpable, I don't believe they would have let her plead guilty to a first-degree murder. And if she wasn't guilty, I don't believe she would have pled guilty to a first-degree murder. In fact, during the soliloquy of pleading guilty, well, most of the time the judge asks, are you pleading guilty because you actually are guilty? And they have to say yes. Okay? He pled not guilty. And we're here. They were both charged with the same stuff. She was also facing the death penalty. So who's in control? She goes out, she reports that he's got a body. She tells totally different stuff. That she was being tortured for like a month, chained to the bed, all these different things, that he's ejaculating on the body, and he's opening up the freezer, and he's doing all these things. That's all from her. There's literally zero evidence that proves any of that stuff. That's from her. So when the state says you're going to hear, they're right. You're going to hear, and you're going to hear it from Rebecca Dishman, and that's it. That's it. There's no denying something horrible happened. Something horrible. There's a reason why there are cameras in the courtroom and the media's here, though. Is because this is this kind of thing that people podcast about. I assume there's some podcasters in here. This kind of thing people write books about, right? Because it's fantastic. It's sensational. It's you've got a body in the freezer. I mean, it's got all the hallmarks of a movie, doesn't it? And so when you're trying to paint a picture of someone who would do this sort of thing, we've seen so many movies. I mean, I've seen so many movies. I've seen so many television shows. And what's the profile of someone who would do something? You know, a middle-aged white dude, right? And he's sitting over here, a middle-aged white dude, and it fits the profile. And it's real easy to point the finger. But you have to consider where the evidence comes in. We talked about garbage in, garbage out. If you base your decisions and you base your interpretation on evidence that comes from a terrible source, or which would be questionable whether or not it's evidence, right? Because it's just something that's being offered from a terrible source, or an unworthy source, or an unbelievable source. That if you're basing your opinion on information that's coming from a bad source, then the conclusion that you reach is necessarily bad. That's the concept, that's the idea. So you have to think about where this information is coming from. You have to make them do their job. I mean, that's your job. That's your job, is to make them do their job. Just because they think it's true doesn't make it true, okay? Just because they say it's true doesn't make it true. Just because they say the evidence to us looks this way doesn't mean that's the way it is. It means that's the way it looks to them. And it fits in with the scenario that was presented by Rebecca Dishman. But don't let them think that she's a victim here. That she's the victim, she's coming in here, he was pulling all the strings, she's this puppet, and she's trapped at the house, and she can't leave, and she wasn't. She was not trapped at the house. That's where she lived, because he housed her, and fed her, and provided her a phone, and probably glasses, and probably food, and probably every other thing, because she didn't have a job. She didn't work. I think you're going to hear her talk about she was trying to get disability, and we'll see if we'll talk about that, because she kind of knew the process, and that's also something that someone that has mental capacity issues probably wouldn't understand the process. It's not a simple process to get disability. I don't know if anybody's ever gone through that process or not. You're going to hear that she has some depression and she's got some learning disabilities. Well, learning disabilities do not equate to a lack of intelligence. I went to law school with someone that was toward the top of my class, and she was dyslexic. It doesn't equate. So, depression. Half the lawyers and doctors and professionals I know have depression, have OCD, have ADHD. It doesn't equate to lack of intelligence, okay? So don't let them do that. Don't let them put her up here and pretend like she's a victim when she just pled guilty to all of these charges. Listen to what she says, see if it makes any sense, and then realize that from the beginning, she started telling the story. They bought the story. All the stuff starts to line up with the story she told because she knows all the details. She was there. She knows amazing details. She knows the details about this woman's body, where the cuts are, all her tattoos, that they're naming kids here. She knows all these things. Well, I think she's going to testify to all that stuff. But she knows amazing details. You know why? Because she spent all the time with her. She's the one who was doing all this stuff. She's the one who was interested in any of this kind of stuff. She's a cutter. She talks about cutting. She's got depression, where all the cuts on the body, everything relates back to Rebecca Dishman. She's the one that's at the house. Then she goes out and she blames the one person who they know, who she knows she can blame. And what's he supposed to do? He helps her. And when he goes to the police, when they come and get him, of course he's scared. Of course he denies it. But once he goes in there, he goes, I know why you came and got me. I helped her cover it up. That's the first thing. That's his first reaction. And if they play his statement, you'll see it, right? You'll see the way he reacts to the police officer. And he's really kind of straightforward with them. And they're berating him. They're coming after him. They did not treat her like that. They treated her like a victim. And I think we'll hear that from the officers too. Which is probably not wrong, because she came in and made some accusations they had to follow up. I mean, they weren't acting wrongly by treating her like a victim, because it sure seemed like she was a victim. And then the longer she talked, and the more it changed, and then the details started changing, and then you could see the wheels turning in the officers, because they're good. They know what they're doing. And they started their wheels turning, and said, well, she's more involved. Right? Because they eventually charged her with the same crimes. And now they need her to make their case, which should be problematic. Should be problematic. Because if they had enough evidence to prove that what they're claiming against him without her, they wouldn't put her on the stand. Okay? So all I'm asking is to pay attention to the power, to actual dynamic, the actual power dynamic, okay? Servant and master, or whatever, servant and master, dominant, all that kind of stuff. We're going to see texts. She initiates most conversations. Hey, I'm thinking about you. It's all sexting and like, it's just kind of gross. We're going to go through it, okay? And almost always the conversation ends with, baby, I got to go. I'm getting busy. I'm at work. And she's texting from her friend's phone, Mahogany, all this stuff. Who's going to come in and say, you know, I guess that she was abused. I don't know what she's going to say. We'll see what she says, but I mean, you got to look at all of it. You can't just take the narrative that's laid out there. It's too easy. It's too easy. And I told you, this is not easy. It's not supposed to be easy. You're supposed to be able to separate out the reality from the narrative, right? This isn't, y'all are not writing news articles. It's not a narrative where you have to tell this linear story. They kind of do, because their job is to tell the story. And it's a hard job, and they've got to come and they've got to try to do it. But it doesn't mean they can't. And your job is to make sure that either they can or they can't, but you got to make sure that they do. Because the more we allow the state, well, the lower we take the burden, we're just notching away at our individual rights. We're just notching away at them. We have to hold them to our burden. That's what defense attorneys do, right? We wake up every day and we try to defend the Constitution the best we can. That's ideally what we're doing. Because we have to defend people who are charged with crimes in order to do that, right? And so then we come in here and our job is to make them do their job, because that makes them better. That makes the police better. That makes the attorneys better, the prosecutors better. It makes the system better. And the system is you. Y'all are what makes this work. And the way that you make this work is you hold them to their burden. You don't just take them on their word. And you don't just take their narrative as the truth because that's the way they see it. Right? We're not on their team. We're all citizens of this state, and they represent the state of Tennessee. They represent me just like they represent you guys. They represent they prosecute for the state of Tennessee. But they're humans just like I am, and they see things a certain way. And if you're a prosecutor, you see things like a prosecutor. If you are a police officer, you see things like a police officer. because that's your experience. That's your life experience. I'm asking you guys to step out of whatever your life experience is, because you're going to be dealing with stuff that I think is probably not a part of your life experience. So don't jump to conclusions just because of the awe factor, because this is a shock and awe campaign. All right, they're going to show you disgusting things. Most of it happened after the fact. After the fact. And what you're really here to determine is what happened before. What happened? How did she die? Who intended to kill her? Right? Who intended to kill her? Who intended to kidnap her, if there's a kidnapping? Right? Who intended any of it? That's what you're here to determine. Because if you can't determine that, then he's not guilty. Right? He's not guilty. He's presumed innocent. That he's presumed innocent. Beyond a reasonable doubt means that if there is a doubt, he gets the benefit of that doubt. Literally the benefit of the doubt. You've got to keep that in mind, because we're about to hear a bunch of crazy stuff. A bunch of crazy stuff. So please, just pay attention. Pay attention. Pay attention. And every time that there's evidence here, and there's scientific evidence, or there's something that's being introduced, ask yourself, does this evidence support what she said? Or does it support more of what he said? Or does it support any of it, right? Does it support any of it enough to be beyond a reasonable doubt for anything? That's the first thing. But you're also, this is almost like a he said, she said situation to some degree when you're trying to determine what actually happened in there. Because I think that there's not going to be a lot of argument about some of the things that happened afterwards. There's definitely going to be argument about some of the other things, but he gave a statement and he admits to things, and you can take them for what they are, and you can determine whether or not it proves beyond a reasonable doubt, but we're leaving that up to you guys. He did not plead guilty to first-degree murder. He did not plead guilty to kidnapping. He did not plead guilty to aggravated kidnapping. He did not plead guilty to anything on here. So anything that you want to find him guilty of, you're going to have to find him guilty of. And you're going to have to find him guilty because they proved it. That's the only way you can do it. It's the only way you can do it. And that's all I'm asking. It's real straightforward. I'm not going to try to pull the wool over your eyes. I'm not going to tap dance up here. But my job is to poke holes in what they claim supports her story. And so that's what I'm going to try to do. And you need to pay attention to see if what they put in here actually supports their story. Because if there's questions on responsibility, if there's questions on culpability, if there's questions on who wanted this to happen, if there's questions on who needed this to happen, if there's questions on who had the motive to make this happen, those are serious questions when we're talking about putting somebody to death. Those are serious questions, guys. There's not a more important case that you could sit on as a juror. There's not. There's just not. First-degree murder is the top charge in this state. And every time there's a first-degree murder jury, I say the same thing, I think. I try to. But you guys are doing the most important thing you could possibly do as a juror in the country. This is the top count anybody can face, and he's facing the top penalty anybody can face if he's convicted. Your job is to do your job. And I would never ask anybody to do more than their job. But you need to understand what your job is. And what your job is not to just kind of observe and take it all in. Or your job is to literally sit there and critically judge every single thing that comes in. And it's a difficult thing because it's a difficult thing for me. I'm sitting there and I've been doing this a long time, and it's difficult to think about all the different facts. There's a lot of stuff to pay attention to. So the real simple question is, how does this prove what they're claiming happened? That's the question. Who's actually in control? The person that's testifying here who's still holding control basically over whether or not he lives or dies. Or the man sitting over there at the desk that says, I'm not guilty. At the end, I'm going to ask you to find him not guilty of first-degree murder. I'm going to ask you to find him not guilty of kidnapping. I'm going to ask you to find him not guilty of these underlying crimes that could even lead you to a death penalty determination, because he's not guilty of this. And I'm going to ask you to find him not guilty of those things.